Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping in, really getting ready to tackle one of the most, well, intellectually rigorous and frankly sometimes terrifying books in political philosophy.
You mean Hobbes's Leviathan?
Exactly. Thomas Hobbes's 1651 masterpiece, Leviathan. You have to remember this was written during the English Civil War, a time of absolute chaos.
Right, and that context is everything, isn't it? He's not just theorizing in a vacuum. He's reacting to visceral fear, the fear of society completely falling apart.
And he's building a solution from the ground up. He calls the state the artificial man and starts, bizarrely almost, with the mechanics of the human body and mind.
That's what's so unique, that methodical, almost mathematical progression. He moves from, basic senses, how we see, hear, feel, then to speech, then passions.
And only then does he build up the political structure.
Precisely. And then he spends a huge amount of time identifying the internal threats, philosophical, religious, that could make this whole structure crumble. It's incredibly comprehensive.
So, our mission today is to pull out the absolute core insights from this massive work for you. We're focusing on how Hobbes sees the individual, his, well, pretty radical definition of justice.
Radical and maybe purely utilitarian.
Yes, exactly. And why he insists on an absolute, indivisible sovereign power as the only way to get peace. This is really your guide to understanding why Hobbes is still such a giant in political thought. Ready to unpack this?
Let's do it.
Okay, so to get the Leviathan, the state, we first need to understand its building block.
Man, Hobbes kicks things off by looking at how we think, and his definition of understanding is very mechanical.
It really is. He says understanding is just imagination, a kind of internal motion triggered by words or other voluntary signs. No mystical soul stuff here.
Purely material.
Purely material. And he immediately distinguishes between the basic understanding animals have, like a dog getting a command.
Responding to the sign.
Right. And the uniquely human kind, which involves grasping complex ideas, conceptions, by linking names together, forming statements, arguments, using language structurally. It all comes down to the agreed-upon meaning of words.
Yes. That's what allows us to calculate, to reason together, and ultimately to build a society.
And he slams the door pretty hard on what we can actually conceive. He insists we can't grasp the infinite.
Right. Anything we truly imagine, he says, has to be finite. Because all thought starts with sense experience, right? So you can only picture things with limits, place, size, divisibility. You can't actually form a mental image of something truly limitless.
That sounds almost like a philosophical point, but you said earlier his context is political. How does this limit on infinity play out politically?
Well, his prime example is the name of God. Hobbes argues we use the word God, not because we can conceive of an infinite being, he says God is incomprehensible, but we use the name to honor him.
So it's a performative utterance, almost?
Kind of, yeah. It sidesteps theological debates about God's actual nature, which Hobbes saw as incredibly divisive and dangerous politically. It keeps the focus on the observable, finite world where the state operates.
Okay, so that brings us to speech itself. It's not just useful. For Hobbes, it's foundational.
Foundational is the right word. He calls it the most noble and profitable invention. He's absolutely clear.
Yeah.
Without names, without defined language, you literally can't have a commonwealth, society, contracts, or peace. It's that fundamental.
Why? What's the mechanism there?
Because speech is how we reckon, how we calculate. Think about numbers. How could you do even basic addition or subtraction, let alone complex engineering or economics, without names for numbers?
Impossible.
Right. And since society depends on calculating things, trade, building, defense, defined language is the essential operating system.
This precision requirement leads him to attack what he sees as sloppy thinking, right? Philosophical absurdity.
Well, absolutely. When language breaks down, when we use words without clear definitions, or worse, words that are self-contradictory, our reckoning fails. This is where he lays into the schoolmen, the academics of his time.
With those words insignificant.
Exactly. He loves examples like an incorporeal body.
A body without a body.
It's nonsense. Like round quadrangle. If quadrangle means four-sided and round means not having straight sides or corners, the phrase cancels itself out. It signifies nothing. It's just noise.
Now, he applies this to fancy theological terms, too.
Yeah, things like empowered virtue or abstract essences. He sees them as intellectual dead ends, distracting from studying actual cause and effect in the world.
Okay, so we've got this individual, limited senses, finite understanding, but with this powerful, double-edged sort of language. Now, what makes him tick? The internal engine.
Passions. Hobbes sees human action as driven by motion. Appetite, desire, aversion, fear. These are the small beginnings of motion within us. And even actions driven by fear, he insists, are voluntary actions.
Wait, how can an action based on fear be voluntary? That sounds contradictory.
Well, think about his example, throwing cargo overboard in a storm to save the ship. You do it out of fear of sinking, right? But you chose to do it. You weighed the options, lose the cargo, or potentially lose everything, including your life. And you voluntarily chose the lesser evil. The motion originated from fear, but the action was willed.
Okay, I see. So deliberation is just weighing these competing desires and fears.
Exactly. It's weighing the likely chain of consequences. You tally up the good bits and the bad bits stemming from an action. If the good seems to outweigh the bad, that's what he calls the apparent or seeming good, and that's what you'll likely do.
So foresight is key. Experience and reason help you calculate those consequences better.
Crucial for making good choices, for good counsel. But what fuels this whole process? What's the ultimate driver?
You mentioned it earlier, power.
The desire for power. He argues that differences in intelligence, what he calls wit, are mainly caused by the varying strength of this desire. Riches, knowledge, honor, they're all valuable because they are power, or means to more power.
It's a pretty bleak view of human motivation.
It's certainly unsentimental, and he links our passions directly to our mental state. Weak passions. That leads to dullness, apathy. No clear goals driven by passion. You get giddiness or distraction.
And strong passions.
Stronger, more vehement passions, if they overwhelm reason, lead to what people call madness.
He had that weird example about the play, right? People getting sick from watching a tragedy.
Yeah, the story about the audience watching a play about Perseus and Andromeda. They supposedly got so emotionally caught up that they developed fevers and just wandered around reciting lines from the play.
Wow.
For Hobbes, it's an illustration of how extreme passion can literally derail the mind, make it incapable of rational thought and action. It's like a physiological response.
He even analyzes laughter through this lens of passion and comparison.
He does. Famously, he defines laughter as sudden glory. It's that feeling of triumph or self-applause you get when you suddenly notice some kind of defect or absurdity in someone else, which makes you feel superior by comparison.
That's doubly cynical. So, laughter is never just pure joy for him.
Not really. It's rooted in that quick hint of superiority. And he even attaches a moral critique to excessive laughter at others' flaws. He connects it to pusillanimity.
Small-mindedness. Cowardice.
Yeah, basically saying that truly great minds, people with magnanimity, don't need to constantly put others down to feel good. They focus on helping others or comparing themselves to the best, not laughing at the unfortunate.
Okay, so we have this picture of the individual. Self-interested, driven by passions, constantly seeking power, using language as a tool. Now, Hobbes puts this creature into the state of nature before any government. And the first thing he establishes is equality. That seems odd.
It's the absolute bedrock of his argument, and yeah, it feels counterintuitive. But he insists that nature made man basically equal in body and mind.
How can that be? Surely some people are stronger or smarter.
Physically, he says the differences don't matter that much because even the weakest person can kill the strongest through secret plots or ganging up with others. Vulnerability is universal.
Okay, so physical equality in terms of threat potential. What about mentally?
He argues mental equality is even clearer. Prudence, or wisdom, he says, is just experience. And given equal time, people gain roughly equal experience. The only reason we think we're so much smarter than others is vanity, vain conceit of one's own wisdom.
So the fact that everyone thinks they're the smartest actually proves we're all equally prone to that delusion.
Exactly. It demonstrates equality, not inequality. And this fundamental equality is precisely what leads to conflict.
How does that work?
Because if we're equal in ability, we have equal hope of getting what we want. If two people want the same thing, they can't both have land, resources, whatever, they become enemies. This breeds universal distrust, what he calls diffidence.
And from diffidence.
War, a war of every man against every man.
Now, we need to be really clear what he means by war. It's not constant fighting, is it?
No, that's crucial. War isn't just the battle itself. It's the known disposition to fight, existing over a tract of time, when there's no assurance to the contrary.
Like a constant state of red alert? If there's no power enforcing peace, you're effectively always at war, even if no one's currently swinging a sword.
Precisely. All other time is peace, which requires active enforcement. And in this state of war, the consequences are dire. Life is, famously, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
And concepts like justice just disappear.
They have no place. Where there's no common power, there's no law. Where there's no law, there's no injustice. Force and fraud become the key virtues. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice are meaningless outside of society.
And no property either.
Nope. Every man has a right of nature to everything, including other people's bodies. Ownership is just what you can grab and keep hold of until someone stronger takes it.
Okay, so this is the miserable condition we need to escape. How do we do it? Through reason.
Yes, reason suggests articles of peace, which Hobbes calls the laws of nature. The first and fundamental law is seek peace and follow it.
Endeavor peace.
Endeavor peace. And the second law tells us how. A person must be willing, if others are also willing, to lay down this right to all things and be content with as much liberty against others as they would allow others against themselves.
That sounds like the golden rule, essentially.
It is. It's the basis of the social contract, this mutual transferring of rights.
Which brings us to contracts and covenants. What's the difference for Hobbes?
A contract is just that mutual transfer of right. A covenant is a specific type of contract where one person delivers their side now and trusts the other person to deliver theirs later. Deferred performance based on trust.
And that's the problem in the state of nature, right? Trust.
Exactly. Covenants based on mutual trust are invalid in the state of nature. Why? Because there's always a reasonable fear that the other person won't follow through. If you perform your part first, you just make yourself vulnerable, potentially prey.
So you need some kind of enforcement mechanism.
You need a coercive power, the Commonwealth, the Leviathan, to compel people to perform their covenants through the fear of punishment. Only then do covenants become binding and reliable.
That makes sense. No courts, no police. Promises are just words.
Right. But here's a twist. Hobbes says covenants made out of fear in the state of nature are valid.
How so? Like being robbed?
His example is if you promise a ransom to a robber to save your life, that promise, that covenant, is valid because you are voluntarily choosing the action, promising the money, to avoid the greater evil, death. It aligns with the fundamental drive for self-preservation.
So self-preservation trumps almost everything.
Almost everything. Any covenant where you promise not to defend yourself or to accuse yourself without assurance of pardon is automatically void. You can't logically contract away the very thing the contract is supposed to secure your life and safety.
Okay. And he rules out contracts with animals.
Yeah, because they don't understand speech, they can't understand the transfer of right.
And with God.
Also impossible. Unless God speaks directly through revelation or through someone Eshnen. He has authorized his lieutenant on earth, which sets up later arguments about the sovereign.
Okay, so contracts need enforceability. This leads directly to his definition of justice.
Super simple, brutally simple. Justice is the not performance of covenant. Injustice is simply breaking a valid agreement.
So justice is literally just keeping your promises.
That's it. But, and this is the key, the concepts of justice and injustice only come into being with the Commonwealth. Because only the state provides the terror of punishment needed to make covenants valid and enforceable in the first place. No state, no laws, no valid covenants, no justice.
It's entirely artificial, a creation of the state.
Entirely. Along with propriety or property rights. Those also only begin when the state exists to enforce who owns what.
He does add a little nuance, though, between justice of actions and justice of manners.
He does, and it's important for understanding the character of a good citizen. Justice of actions is just, did you keep this specific promise or not?
Like a legal definition.
Right. But justice of manners is about a person's disposition, their character. A just man is someone who consistently tries to act justly, who values keeping covenants. He calls it a certain nobleness or gallantness of courage that scorns using fraud or breach of promise.
So a generally honorable person might slip up occasionally due to passion, but still be considered just in character.
Yes. It's about the overall commitment to the principle of upholding agreements, which is the foundation of peace. It's a virtue rooted in recognizing the necessity of order.
All right, so humans, driven by fear of that nasty, brutish state of nature, agreed to create this artificial man, the Commonwealth, its sole purpose.
Particular security, escaping that constant fear of violent death and securing the conditions for a more commodious life. And to achieve that, Hobbes argues, requires direction by one judgment continually.
One controlling mind or assembly. But why can't humans just cooperate naturally, like, say, bees or ants? They have ordered societies without a king handing down laws.
Hobbes has a whole list of reasons. Unlike those creatures, men are constantly competing for honor and dignity. Envy and hatred are common.
We use reason to find fault with how things are run.
Exactly. And we use speech not just to communicate, but to deliberately misrepresent things called good evil and evil good to stir up trouble. We can persuade others towards chaos.
And he adds that humans are most troublesome when they're comfortable.
Yes. When they are at ease, that's when they love to show off their wisdom and meddle in controlling the state. Ants and bees just get on with it. Their private good aligns with the common good naturally. Ours doesn't.
So we need this artificial power to keep us in awe. How is it created?
Through that mutual transfer of rights we talked about, everyone agrees to give up their right to govern themselves to one person or one assembly of people.
On the condition that everyone else does too.
Right. This creates the sovereign, and this sovereign now bears the person of them all. He acts for them. This leads to that really crucial and often tricky distinction between the author and the actor.
Okay, let's nail this down. The sovereign is the actor.
Performing the actions of the state, making laws, waging war, punishing criminals.
And the subjects.
The subjects, having agreed to the covenant that created the sovereign, are the authors of everything the sovereign does.
Whoa. Okay, so if the sovereign puts someone to death.
In Hobbes's framework, the person being executed is, in a legal sense, the author of their own punishment, because they authorize the sovereign to do whatever is necessary for peace and security, which includes enforcing laws.
That feels deeply counterintuitive from a justice perspective. How can you authorize your own unjust treatment?
Because for Hobbes, justice is the keeping of the covenant that authorized the sovereign. Complaining about the sovereign's actions is like complaining about your own actions, which is illogical. This is why the rights of the sovereign are absolute and indivisible. Let's list them out.
Okay. First, subjects can't just decide to change the government.
Nope, they already covenanted. Second, sovereign power can't be forfeited. The sovereign can't breach the covenant because they weren't a party to the initial agreement between subjects.
Right. The subjects agreed among themselves to create the sovereign. Third, if a majority declares a sovereign, the minority has to consent or be justly destroyed.
Harsh, but logical in his system. Fourth, and this links back to your point, the sovereign's actions cannot be justly accused of injury by a subject.
Because the subject is the author.
Precisely. The sovereign can commit iniquity act against the laws of nature or God, but not injustice towards the subject, because injustice is breaking a covenant, and the sovereign made no covenant with the subject.
Which means fifth, the sovereign is unpunishable by the subjects.
Correct. You can't punish yourself.
This power isn't just about punishment and war, is it? It extends further.
Much further. The sovereign is the ultimate judge of what opinions and doctrines are acceptable or dangerous to peace. Control over education and public discourse is essential.
Because bad ideas lead to conflict.
Exactly. The sovereign also judges all controversies, judicature, decides on war and peace, chooses counselors and ministers, rewards and punishes according to law, or arbitrarily if no law exists, and assigns honors and ranks.
And these powers must stay together.
Absolutely indivisible. Hobbes is scathing about dividing power, like giving control of the military to one body and control of money to another. He says that just dissolves the commonwealth from within. It's setting up rival powers destined to clash.
He also briefly touches on different ways sovereignty can be acquired, right? Not just by institution.
Yes, dominion paternal, from parental power, and despotical, by conquest. But he argues the rights of sovereignty are exactly the same, regardless of how it was attained. The subjects obey out of fear, either fear of the person who conquered them, or fear of each other in the state of nature that led them to institute a sovereign.
And paternal dominion isn't just from generating children.
No, it comes from the child's consent, either explicit or inferred, by being raised and protected. It's consent, ultimately, that creates the obligation.
And he's firm on the types of government, only three.
Only three valid forms: monarchy, one ruler; democracy, assembly of all willing to come together; and aristocracy, assembly of a designated part.
What about things like tyranny or oligarchy?
Those are just names people use when they dislike a monarchy or an aristocracy. They express discontent but don't describe a different form of government. It's just rhetoric.
Does he have a preference?
He strongly prefers monarchy. He argues a monarch's private interest is naturally aligned with the public interest. A king needs his kingdom to be strong and prosperous for him to be glorious. Assemblies, he thinks, are prone to internal squabbles, corruption, and inconsistent decisions.
Let's talk about honor. How does that fit in?
Honor, for Hobbes, is all about acknowledging power. To honor someone is to value them highly, to estimate their power. So reputation for power is power. Titles, positions of authority, these are signs the sovereign's favor, which translates to power within the commonwealth.
And in a monarchy, how is power passed on? Succession.
The current monarch has the right to decide the succession. They can do it explicitly through a will or testament, or implicitly through custom or natural signs like favoring their own children. The goal is to avoid the uncertainty that could lead back to war.
Okay, so we have this all-powerful sovereign. What about the liberty of the subject? Does it even exist in this system?
It exists, but maybe not in the way we often think about it. For Hobbes, liberty is simply the absence of external impediments to motion. It's purely physical.
Like a ball rolling down a hill is free until it hits something.
Pretty much. And importantly, he argues fear and liberty are consistent.
We touched on this. Paying a debt because you fear prison is still a free action.
Yes, because you weren't physically chained up and forced. You chose to pay to avoid the alternative you feared more. Liberty for the subject, therefore, mainly exists in the silence of the law.
Meaning, whatever the law doesn't forbid, you're free to do.
Exactly. If there's no law about diet or where you live or how you raise your children, within other legal limits, of course, you have liberty in those areas.
That feels quite constrained. Is that the trade-off? We give up a lot of freedom for security.
That's precisely the Hobbesian bargain. You trade the terrifying, absolute freedom of the state of nature, where everyone has a right to everything, meaning constant conflict, for the limited but secure liberty under an absolute sovereign.
Are there any freedoms we retain absolutely?
Yes, the freedom rooted in self-preservation. You are never bound to kill yourself, wound yourself, or accuse yourself of a crime without guarantee of pardon. The right to defend your own body against assault cannot be alienated by covenant.
Because that would defeat the whole purpose of entering society.
Exactly. And Hobbes has some harsh words for those who champion other kinds of liberty, particularly the classical Republican ideal.
Right. He criticizes writers like Aristotle and Cicero.
He does. He blames them, and the universities teaching them, for misleading people in places like England. By reading these ancient authors who lived in popular states, people learned to equate monarchy with tyranny and slavery.
Which he thought led to unrest.
He believed it directly fueled civil war. This romanticized idea of liberty, often meaning the liberty of the state or assembly, not the individual, encouraged people to resist necessary sovereign power, leading back to chaos. He argues that true peace requires arbitrary government, meaning absolute undivided sovereignty.
So this all leads to his definition of civil law. What is it?
Civil law is simply the command of the sovereign. It's the set of rules the Commonwealth commands subjects to use to distinguish right from wrong. It's not advice, it's an order.
And the sovereign isn't bound by these laws.
Logically, no. Since the sovereign makes and can repeal the laws, they can free themselves from subjection to them whenever they please. The lawmaker is above the law.
But what about interpreting the law? Should judges just be literal?
No, he emphasizes equity. The judge's role is to discern the intention of the sovereign, the reason behind the law. If following the literal words leads to an unreasonable outcome, the judge should rely on the law of nature equity, which aims for fairness.
And the core of that natural law.
It's the simple, easily understood rule. Do not that to another, which thou wouldest not have done to thyself. That's the foundation beneath all the specific civil laws.
Okay, we've built the Leviathan, impressive structure. But Hobbes seems almost obsessed with how it could fall apart. He dedicates huge sections to the threats.
He really does. Parts 3 and 4 are all about the kingdom of darkness and the things that weaken the Commonwealth. He starts by grounding moral philosophy itself.
How did he define that?
As the science of good and evil in human society. In nature, good is just what you desire, evil is what you hate. Private appetite rules.
But in society?
Since everyone agrees peace is good,
Yeah.
because it's necessary for survival and comfort, then the means to peace, justice, gratitude, equity, modesty, mercy, all those laws of nature become the objective moral virtues. Their opposite are vices.
And breaking these laws has natural consequences.
Yes, he talks about natural punishments. Intemperance leads to disease, rebellion leads to slaughter, injustice naturally leads back towards the state of war. Morality is essentially the rule book for maintaining peace.
But the biggest enemy isn't just individual vice, it's organized deception, this kingdom of darkness.
That's his term for it, yes. He defines it as a confederacy of deceivers who use false doctrines to extinguish the light of reason and scripture, aiming to gain power over people in this life.
Who are these deceivers, mainly?
Primarily, he targets certain interpretations of Christian doctrine and the influence of what he considers vain philosophy, especially Aristotelian ideas that have infiltrated theology and politics.
What's the primary theological error he attacks?
The idea that the kingdom of God is the present church. Hobbes insists the kingdom of God existed only under Moses with Jews and won't exist again until Christ returns. Confusing the church with God's literal kingdom on earth gives church leaders unwarranted temporal power.
How does that empower the clergy specifically?
It allows pastors to claim they are the clergy in the Old Testament sense, like the Levites, whose maintenance was God's special reserve. This, he argues, tricks people into paying a double tribute taxes to the state and tithes support to the church as if it were a separate power.
Creating divided loyalty.
Exactly, a spiritual power competing with the civil sovereign. He also critiques doctrines like the natural immortality of the soul, suggesting Scripture points to eternal life as a gift of grace, not an inherent property, which again shifts power dynamics.
Okay, that's the religious side. What about the philosophical darkness? Aristotle again.
Yes, he sees errors derived from Aristotle's metaphysics as incredibly damaging. Things like abstract essences, the idea that qualities like humanity or roundness can exist separately from actual humans or round things.
Why is that politically dangerous?
Because it allows for talk of incorporeal substances, spirits, demons, invisible powers that can frighten people and potentially rival the visible power of the state. He mocks terms like nungstans, the eternal now, and insists metaphysics just means books placed after the physics but got twisted into meaning supernatural philosophy.
Purely linguistic confusion leading to real-world problems.
That's his view. And politically, learning from Greek and Roman authors teaches people to call any non-popular government tyranny. They fail to grasp, he says, that absolute power, what they might call tyranny, is the only alternative to civil war. This veneration of classical liberty is seditious.
What other specific doctrines does he label as seditious?
A big one is that every private man is judge of good and evil actions.
But isn't that conscience? Don't we have to judge for ourselves?
Hobbes says no, not against the law. While your private conscience judges your intentions before God, your actions must conform to the law. If everyone follows their own private judgment about what laws are good or bad, society dissolves into chaos.
So what about the idea that acting against your conscience is a sin? That seems like a direct conflict.
He tackles that directly. He calls it the doctrine of erroneous conscience. Yes, acting against conscience is a sin, but conscience itself, which is just judgment, can be mistaken. If your private judgment conflicts with the law, you're obliged to obey the law, because the law is the public conscience. By entering the Commonwealth, you've agreed to let the law guide your actions. To follow your potentially mistaken private conscience against the public conscience, the law, is the real source of disorder.
This leads him to argue for the absolute supremacy of the civil ruler, even in religious matters.
Absolutely, especially within a Christian commonwealth. He insists Christian doctrine contains nothing contrary to reason, only things potentially above it. Misinterpretation is the problem.
So who gets to interpret?
The sovereign. The civil sovereign, if Christian, is the supreme pastor, the head of the church within their own territory. The church and the Christian commonwealth are the same thing, just viewed from different aspects.
So the king can baptize, preach, consecrate.
He argues they have the authority to do so, or to authorize others. Any distinction between temporal and spiritual power is just words used to divide loyalty and usurp the sovereign's rights.
This is his big attack on the power of the Pope and the Catholic Church structure.
Yes. He sees claims of indirect spiritual supremacy, like those made by Cardinal Bellarmine, as just as dangerous as claims of direct power. Any division of ultimate authority leads to civil strife.
And he uses some pretty strong imagery here.
Extremely strong, comparing the papacy to the kingdom of fairies, full of enchantments and charms like exorcisms, relics, and famously calling it the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire, sitting crowned upon the grave thereof. He sees it as an illegitimate structure built on false doctrines, designed purely for earthly power.
And where are these doctrines being spread? Where's the source of the infection?
The universities, he calls them the operatories of the clergy, where future leaders are indoctrinated with these vain philosophies and seditious ideas like tyrannicide, divided sovereignty, the superiority of spiritual power.
So reforming university curricula is essential for state security.
For Hobbes, absolutely critical. You have to control the ideas that shape the minds of those who will eventually influence or govern the populace. Otherwise, you're just breeding the seeds of the Commonwealth's destruction.
It's a total system. From the mechanics of thought to the curriculum of schools, all geared towards preventing that slide back into the chaos of the state of nature. #outro.
Wow. Okay, so let's try and summarize the core journey here. We go from the individual, defined by sense, driven by passions, and the quest for power, using language to reason.
Only to find that in a natural state, this leads inevitably to a war of all against all because of fundamental equality and competition.
The escape route is the social contract, creating the Leviathan, the artificial person, the state by transferring rights to an absolute sovereign.
A sovereign whose power must be indivisible to be effective. Justice and property rights become artificial constructs, defined and enforced by this sovereign power. The subject, in effect, becomes the author of the sovereign's actions needed for peace.
And the biggest long-term threats aren't necessarily foreign armies, but internal decay caused by ignorance, false philosophical ideas, and religious doctrines that preach divided loyalty or challenge the sovereign's absolute authority. That's Hobbes in a nutshell, I think. The enduring power of his argument is that stark choice he presents, absolute authority or complete chaos. He forces you to confront the price of peace and order, stripping away a lot of the comforting illusions about natural rights or inherent justice.
So let's recap the key takeaways for you.
1. Human society, knowledge, everything is built on names, on speech. Defining terms clearly is paramount. Undefined or contradictory language leads straight to absurdity and conflict.
2. Justice and property aren't natural. They are artificial constructs, entirely dependent on the state's power to enforce agreements and laws. Without that power, they don't exist.
And 3. The only guarantee against lapsing back into the misery of war is an absolute, indivisible sovereign. You accept this total authority, becoming the author of its actions, as the price for security.
Which leaves us with a final, really challenging thought for you to ponder, building on that idea of conscience. Hobbes insists ignorance forces us to rely on authority, and the law must be the public conscience. But what happens when a private individual sincerely believes the sovereign's command is wrong, perhaps a sin against God? They know acting against their own conscience is, for them, a sin, even if Hobbes says that conscience might be flawed. If the choice boils down to obeying the state versus obeying what you believe is God's will, can the Leviathan truly bring peace to that individual soul? Or is that internal conflict the unavoidable cost of external order?
A conflict Hobbes perhaps underestimates or maybe just accepts as necessary collateral damage for the greater good of preventing civil war. Something to think about.